you always start with these brilliant ideas of what Abe Lincoln would say or do.
If Abe Lincoln were alive today, he would have more advertising on buses than Jacob Emrami.
How to Be Abe Lincoln, based on the book by Jonathan Shapiro. And now here are your hosts, Jonathan Shapiro and Greg Grunberg.
Wow, the attorney that everybody looked. And by the way, I think the official attorney for the Los Angeles Lakers, which I think our guest is can dispute, the official attorney. Why do attorneys broadcast? Why do they have to sponsor? You're one of the most successful attorneys, Jeffrey Lenkov, and you don't do that.
Well, in his marketplace, that's his audience. I mean, he needs to affiliate with the Lakers, the Clippers, some team to be able to attract the audience. He is the official sponsor as an attorney of the team. He doesn't work for the team, and I don't think he's ever seen a day in court, that guy.
All right, let's not say bad things about Jacob
but that's
Emrami.
interesting.
I like Jacob Emrami.
Yeah, but here's a guy who he's an attorney, just making a living.
So why did I say Abe Lincoln would have ads on buses?
Yeah, why would Abe Lincoln
say
do
habla
that?
español, yo soy abogado para usted.
Right.
And the reason is because Abe Lincoln, in a lot of ways, was our first national lawyer advertiser. Abe Lincoln was an innovator and so relevant to 2023 because he was really gifted in branding himself. He was a guy who used everything at hand to promote himself. And I'll give you an example. He could afford a good horse. He always got a horse that was too small for him because he realized it was funny. When he rode into town, when he would ride the circuits going around having court cases with other lawyers, he would carry this giant green umbrella, and stitched in white was A. Lincoln. The hat. He knew that it really made his height and angularity absurd.
Mm-hmm.
But he also knew that no one looking at all of that would forget it. And so I think because he was an innovator, he sat for 150 portraits at a time when it was really hard to take photos.
But doesn't all of that for an attorney turn you into a bit of a P.T. Barnum instead of, the I mean, you don't do that. You're one of the most well-respected attorneys in entertainment and sports and everything. You don't need to do any of that shit.
Different time. He was shaping an image. He was the early sort of Jacob Emrami or advertising. He was creating and cultivating what he thought would be a powerful statement. Anyone viewing him or interacting with him, which is what lawyers do today all the time. We all do it in some form or another.
Well, that's interesting. So how, let's say Abe Lincoln were a lawyer today, trial lawyer, but also a corporate lawyer, represented railroads, right?
Right.
He had a very broad practice. What kind of advertising would he do today, and what would the message be? How does one advertise as a lawyer today to get clients?
Well, look, you're talking about a whole wide range of marketing. It depends. If you're a personal injury lawyer and you're advertising on buses, you're advertising on buses because you're going to the masses, right? You want buses to be driving through the streets, or if you're on television and you're advertising during certain peak hours, it's because those peak hours attract viewership, and that's who you want to get. I doubt that Lincoln would have been a personal injury lawyer. He would have been probably a corporate, or if he was working for railroads, he probably would have cultivated his image as serious, strong, successful, and maybe, I doubt he would have advertised for that because he wouldn't have had a need to advertise that. He would have just continued who he was with his clients.
The interesting thing about Lincoln, and it's hard to believe, our greatest president, greatest American ever, most of his cases actually were personal injury in a sense, in that they were really small cases. I mean, it's amazing that he was considered one of the best lawyers of his age, and he did have some big clients. But a huge number of his cases had to do with insults. This was at a time where you could sue for basic defamation, in a sense. He defended people who were accused of some horrible crimes, from murder on down to the mistreatment of other people's property and livestock. So I always thought that Abe Lincoln would have probably been the kind of advertiser who would have used television, because he really did. He let himself, and he went out of his way to get photographed because he knew photographs would be material for newspapers and could be used for campaigns, and which was kind of a forward-thinking approach, right? Because photography was brand new. I think he would have used TV. I think he would have used the internet. And I think he would have used the internet to convey the idea that Abe Lincoln can represent any case at any time because he was a lawyer's lawyer.
How do you start back then? How did he start as an attorney? And did you have to join a firm? I mean, what was it like back then? I know these might be stupid questions, but I'm just looking at, how you build a practice, or you join a practice and then become a partner and all that. Was that the same?
Oh, I'd love Jeff to answer that, because it occurs to me that you and Lincoln have a lot in common, and that you both got your legal education in Illinois.
Well, that's probably where it ends, the comparisons. Frankly. I grew up in Montreal. I came from sort of modest means. I had gotten into really what would be deemed like a lot of top law schools, but my parents just didn't have the money from Montreal to send me to, for example, an Ivy League school, which would have cost just a tremendous amount of money. My father still had another son, my brother, at home who wanted to be a lawyer, and he had to save whatever he had for that. But my roots was sort of unconventional, because I was a Canadian kid that went to a small law school in Illinois and then found his way out here because my brother was out here, and I wanted to see if he was successful out here and he was starting to have a career, if I could be successful amongst sort of more high-powered folks. I wanted to really see if I could succeed in what was the big leagues, I felt, Los Angeles or New York. Chicago somewhat, but I didn't like the Chicago weather.
Well, so Lincoln, too, wanted to get out from where he was and make it big and become national. It's interesting, lawyers, there's the old line that two lawyers can make a living in a town that's too small for one lawyer.
Right.
That something about lawyers creates its own business. Lincoln was adverse to litigation. He always told clients, settle. For a guy who made his living at it, it's interesting how often he tried to get people to resolve things without court and without conflict. Is that something you follow?
That completely adheres to what I've always followed, because especially nowadays, litigation is so unpredictable. And depending who you're representing, whether it's corporate clients, sports teams, individuals, athletes, celebrities, there's never any real good that comes out through long, drawn-out trials. And I recognized that early. I recognized that early in my career, that random abandonment of plans just to get to trial never suited anyone's goals. So I focused really early on getting the best resolution before trial, often really, really early in the litigation, and not overpaying or underpaying, but really getting what would be a good amount for my client on either side, because I didn't want them to go through the rigors of litigation, which I never felt really benefit them.
So you and I had a different practice, because I was a prosecutor for the most part, and a litigator, because I like to be in court and try cases. And that was sort of Lincoln's life, right? Lincoln loved the entertainment value of being around court and trying cases. But I guess his desire to settle as much as he could was a reflection on the fact that he, like a good lawyer, had a duty of loyalty to not do what he wanted to do, but to do what was best for the client. And even though it cost Lincoln money, he always got people to settle. And lawyers criticized Lincoln for it. And Lincoln famously wrote one of his colleagues to say, there'll always be enough business for us, but we don't need to go out of our way to create it. the longer I practiced law, and I don't practice it anymore, but I did for 12 years, it seemed to me that litigation itself was starting to go down in terms of trial work. That we do far fewer trials now in the United States than we did when I started in 1990. And some of this has to do with the fact that corporations make us sign away a lot of our rights to sue. If you look at your contract for credit cards and for things like that, you agree, whether you know it or not, to go to arbitration rather than go to trial. Do you think there's a downside to the decline? And you mentioned that it can save the client a lot of money, and I think Lincoln felt that way too. I'm just wondering if the pendulum has gone too far to the other side, where now nobody goes to trial.
You know, in my world, there's a lot of trials. I mean, in my firm, we have trials all the time. It depends really what area of law you're in. I mean, you know, in a very general sense, corporate clients are reluctant to try cases because of what it does publicity-wise to their brand. On the other hand, you can have corporate disputes, mergers and acquisitions that go on for years and years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees. But to your question as to whether or not there's lesser trials and the impact on the average American or consumer, I do think that the ability to get into courts to enforce your rights has definitely changed and sort of been diminished over the years through a number of reasons. First, most importantly, beyond sort of arbitration agreements, it's just the pure economics, right? Like if you're individual A, even battling your neighbor, two neighbors battling each other over a fence, the cost of litigating that, getting lawyers involved, will ultimately not be worth the dispute.
If you can find lawyers.
Right. If you can find lawyers. And that's the other point about it. There's very few lawyers that will go down to that level of type of case, either doing it on a contingency or an hourly rate that makes it worth their while.
Isn't that interesting? Because I think when Lincoln was alive, there was a general sense that there were too many lawyers. In 2023, you get the general sense there are too many lawyers until you need a lawyer. And then you can't find one.
Right.
More than 50%, it's probably higher now, of people in civil court in the midst of lawsuits don't have a lawyer because they can't find one who's willing to take on the case for the amount of money that they could generate. We have in the Constitution, as it's been interpreted, the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one will be provided for you. In the context of criminal law, there have been debates that we should have the same Miranda rights in civil cases. Why shouldn't you be entitled to a lawyer if you're being sued and could lose everything?
Right.
If you're in the midst of a divorce, why aren't you entitled to a lawyer to protect your rights and the rights often of your children? I used to do political asylum cases where I would represent people who had fled their country out of fear for their lives. I mean, I represented 2 women from Darfur whose entire family was wiped out. And if they lost the asylum case, they were going to be sent back. They weren't entitled to a lawyer. They just happened to be lucky to get public counsel to provide a lawyer. What do you think about this notion that, it seems like we've got too many lawyers, but there's never one around when you need one?
You know, it's really a complex question because you can see on the criminal side why there's a fundamental right that you need a lawyer. Your life and liberty is at stake, right? So that pretty much you need protection, especially if you're indigent or can't afford counsel. You need good counsel. There's a whole separate question, by the way, that even in those circumstances, are you even getting good, competent counsel against skilled prosecutors, against the government who has a lot of resources? So there's all those questions and the racial and socioeconomic issues that go into that. On the civil side, I think it comes down to pure numbers, right? Like we're a market capitalist community society, and who really wants to do those cases? First of all, there's how do you then decide whether it's a family law case versus a neighbor dispute or a corporate case? How do you decide who deserves counsel or not, right? You then have to have resources to enforce that. And I doubt, especially the way we are today, where sort of everyone grabs what they can kill in the legal practice, and it's a little less gentlemanly than it was before, that you would get folks buying into that. I mean, there's to that point though, there are, and to what you said, there are countless occasions when I'm in court and there are folks in civil cases who are not represented, and the judges are really leaning forwards to try and give them some advice, but they can't. And you know those folks are going to struggle because they can't get a lawyer. And it may not have a criminal aspect, but it could have a large enough economic aspect that it changes their life.
You know, in the immigration context, children have to represent themselves in court proceedings. And there's some terrible stories.
That's horrible.
And so you're right about the economics of it, but a society that at least sees that you need a lawyer when they're going to maybe put you in prison or execute you could conceivably be broad-minded enough to say, geez, you really should have a lawyer in all contexts. But I want to take a bit of a side.
Digress.
I want to digress for a second and ask you, growing up in Montreal, what did you know or not know about Abe Lincoln?
Only that he was this, very little. Only that he was a sort of mythological character, president. We didn't discuss presidents at length in school. I didn't read much about him unless there was no internet, of course. I mean, remember, we had Encyclopedia Britannica back then.
Microfiche.
Yeah.
All right, so let me ask you this. The War of 1812, Canada, an important player in that. Is that something that you learned about in Canada?
I mean, we did. We, you're testing me on my history then, but we did. I mean, our studies were more focused on sort of global history, the impact, and then how it played into the Canada's role, with the British Empire, or escaping or separating from the British Empire. Folks think that Canadians grow up and you're really American-centric, but our studies aren't like that.
And so the Canadian piece of the Civil War, slavery, that wasn't something.
No.
So when you came to the United States and you're in Illinois, the land of Lincoln, how did you become educated? Or is that just something that one sort of gets through osmosis because he's such a ubiquitous figure that you can't help but learn a lot about Lincoln if you're here?
I think it's the latter. I think you can help, but first of all, in Illinois, he's a massive presence, his home and all that. But I think you learn about it, and especially as a lawyer, I think your interest is piqued over those type of figures as you start becoming more fluent and sort of more studious in as a lawyer and moving forward in your career.
Let me ask you about Lincoln as a lawyer. He obviously had political aspirations, more than just having a practice. How long did he have a practice?
Well, he became a state legislator and wasn't a lawyer. So you have the odd situation where he was writing laws that he himself couldn't actually practice.
Interesting.
He didn't go to law school because really there weren't law schools like that available to him. It's much more of a later in the century thing that is more on the East Coast. But what one would do is study in a law chambers. And so he got elected to the Illinois state legislature. He wrote laws, but he didn't actually get to practice. He didn't get a license until 2 years after that. So we're talking about, I believe, the 1830s, early 1830s. He became a lawyer. And he wasn't a lights out success by any means. He had to do as all young lawyers do, unless they go to a prestigious law firm now and are still pretty much guaranteed a job coming out of law school. Most people who come out of law school are having a difficult time finding work. I used to teach at a law school where at one point during the recession, 30% of the class got a job. So 70% were still trying to
Is that because they weren't good?
It's because, like every industry, maybe you've heard about it in show business, I know I have, there's been a contraction of opportunities. There are fewer jobs. some of it has to do with technology. You know, there are things that young lawyers used to be hired to do, shepherd cases and things like that, due diligence and corporate takeovers,
right,
that are now being done by paralegals, but also being done by computers. And so it's not that they weren't good. It's just that those jobs are often, depending on the economy.
And those jobs were a way in.
Right.
And so, today, do you have just an abundance of people that are knocking on your door that want an interview, that want a general meeting, that just want your attention?
You know, it's odd. There's a lot of folks entering the practice of law, leaving law school. There are not a lot of folks that we seem to find that want to be lawyers. You know, when I went to law school, I come from a family of no lawyers, but to be a lawyer was something unique and special and something that I really wanted to do. Like I stupidly turned down opportunities where I could have been quite wealthy other than if I didn't want to be a lawyer. But I always loved the thought of being a lawyer, the control, like representing clients. You got a lot of folks, and not all of them, but there are a large amount of people that go into law school over the last 20 years because it's just a continuation of college, you know? So it's a way to avoid actually getting into the workforce. So a graduate degree is another level, but when they go into the practice of law, they realize that it is not that glamorous at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Your first years are really hard, very hard. And and what you thought was going to be this prestigious mom and dad, you can tell the neighbors and the family that I'm a lawyer, is really a hard way to make a living.
So I'd like to talk about something I talked about in my first book, Lawyers, Liars, and the Art of Storytelling, and I talk about in the new book, How to Be Abe Lincoln. We don't do a very good job preparing people to be Abe Lincoln lawyer. Abe Lincoln learned how to be a lawyer first by being in politics and seeing how laws are made, and then by working for lawyers and being in court every day and learning on the job by seeing how they do it. Mm-hmm. And in learning how they do it, Lincoln realized what you're talking about, too many young lawyers are never taught until they're lawyers, which is it's a service business. You know, we all want to think we're going to be Atticus Finch or Abe Lincoln. Well, Abe Lincoln realized from the very beginning he was a servant of a client. What he was there to do was solve the problem that someone in a fix had gotten into, mm-hmm. or was looking to get justice for someone through a system that, for the most part, can't give them the justice they want. I had an older lawyer once tell me, the first thing you do when a client comes in and says, what would you like to have happen? Generally speaking, what they would like to have happen is not obtainable. You know, if somebody hits you in your car, what would you like to have happen? Well, I'd like them to be killed. See, I can't do that as a lawyer. Let me tell you what I can do, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's important to establish, and this was very much his practice. Lincoln would ask them in plain spoken way, what happened? What do you want? And then he would try to dissuade them from litigation and explain to them the limits of a trial and the limits of a court and what it costs. Well, he was doing something that in the 21st century they train you now is, and they have seminars about it, client expectation control, right? You're in a service business. What you don't want to do is overpromise and underdeliver. Mm-hmm. And Abe Lincoln was a genius for underpromising and over-delivering. So one way that law school could be better is be like Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Don't let people go into law school until they've lived a full life. You know, before he was a lawyer, he was a riverboat pilot. He was a surveyor who taught himself how to survey. He was a postmaster. He was a clerk in a general store. He was a soldier in the Black Hawk War. He had lived many lives. And to the degree being a lawyer is all about understanding people, mm-hmm. Lincoln had a great training for it, and we do law students a terrible disservice by not demanding that they have that kind of experience.
Well, Jeff is an amateur hockey player, so I think that really kind of set in motion that you could, and you were a goalie as well, so you were defending something.
Right. So you should be a judge.
What do you do about client expectation? I want to go to that because you represent some of the biggest, most powerful people in entertainment and sports. Their expectation must just be fix it. Yeah, I mean, I'm just imagining. I'm sure you have very nice clients, but I'm saying like there's a problem that comes up and they want you to handle it, and their expectation would probably be short and sweet, and this guy doesn't deserve a thing.
Well, first of all, to your point, I want to answer that, but I will say that I completely agree with you. I think the law schools have become too commercialized, as of they're just sort of institutions spitting out folks, and those folks are entering the marketplace, and it creates dissatisfied individuals because they don't know what they're getting into. MBA programs typically nowadays require a life experience, a workforce appearance for a while. And I think a practice of law, which requires some savvy client interactions, some worldly experience, would be better if you didn't get accepted to law school until you had 3 years of work experience. Get someone in their mid-20s. Now, how do I manage expectations? The 2024 version of or 2023 is blunt. Like when I was starting off, it's tough because you're intimidated. Right. You have clients, and you're amazed almost that you have any clients that believe in you.
Yeah.
Right? Like I would go home and fake it till you make it, and I would think, why would this person even listen to my advice? Like they're calling me up midday and asking me, this person, and I would say like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. But the 2023 version of me is blunt, recognizes that anything but really telling them what their options are up front does them a disservice. Like they have to know, like, if you go in to a high price restaurant, it says there how much a steak costs, you know how much you're paying for that. If you're buying a airline ticket to Paris and you're buying first class, it shows you what you're paying for it. And I think I've always believed, and maybe I'm in the minority, but I believe that the law practice stripped down is nothing more than McDonald's delivering a service. You're delivering a product. The product has to be consistently well, and the client needs to know that they're getting good value for it. So I now make it really, and I've done it for years, but it's even more paramount that they know what they're getting into at the beginning.
Okay, I want to talk about work ethic. Lincoln's work ethic. So Jeff and I, so people know, Jeff and I have been friends forever. We're like family. I've known you forever. No one works harder. The two of us text back and forth. I mean, we have a number of entertainment projects that we do together because we're having a blast doing that. A big documentary on Pete Rose coming out on HBO, and we have others lined up, and it's just great because we have access to, through Jeff and through myself, to great people that have a great story to tell, and also great producers that are able to make it happen, unlike you.
Right, well,
I don't turn to you at all.
It's kind of painful, actually. But go on, yes.
But
I'm happy for my friends. I mean, that's good for them.
The way the world works today, there's a lot of people, and Jeff and I have talked about this over and over again, that turn off their phones at a certain amount of time. They just put those rules into place, and that's fine for them. I don't. The two of us are talking a Sunday night at 11 o'clock. He'll just text me, call me. I call him right away. There's never an ego. There's never nothing. I'm so excited by the Was Lincoln like that?
No.
I mean, really?
No.
Because he got so much done.
Well, so it's interesting. Lincoln had a partner for 14 years that I've talked about before, William Herndon, who was an alcoholic. Everything that Lincoln wasn't. He was irritable. He was conscious of credit and who got it. He could be unbelievably pedantic. He was always on Lincoln to read better books, and he was always trying to show off intellectually. He had no sense of humor, something that Lincoln found funny, that he was so not funny.
Yeah.
And he did all of the paperwork. He did all of the filings. He did all of the research. Lincoln, if he was interested in the case, would be very interested in the case. But Lincoln wasn't interested in a lot of the cases. And there were some things like debt collection, which was an important part of making money for that firm. Lincoln wouldn't do any of it. Lincoln would forgive the debt. And Herndon was absolutely clear in saying he didn't forgive the debt because he was so charitable. He forgave the debt because he was just bored with the cases and didn't like to do them.
Right, move on.
So one of the things I love about Lincoln, he never cared. He made a lot of money for a lawyer back in the day, and every indication is that he didn't care. He was not at all driven by money.
Mm-hmm.
He was driven by that which interested him. He was more likely to be reading the newspaper than a legal brief. So I'm a little that way myself, and so the difference between the kind of law we practice is your kind of law is a 24/7 service. Mine was a service that if court's closed, I have research to do and briefs to write, and witnesses to prepare if I'm in trial. If I'm not in trial,
You can turn it off.
yeah, and I think that appealed to Lincoln because Lincoln was a fella who loved riding the circuit. So riding the circuit, there were 14 little towns that weren't big enough to have their own courts. So a group of lawyers and a judge would, on horseback, go through the wilderness in terrible conditions and hold court in these small towns. Lincoln was the only lawyer who went to every single town. Most guys just did a few of the towns and then went back home. Not Lincoln. And the reason was he loved the camaraderie. He loved shooting the shit. He loved being at the tavern or wherever they were sleeping, usually 2 or 3 lawyers to a bed.
Just like us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how we do it. It's my business trips.
I don't judge. I don't judge. But you're saving the client money.
Yeah.
Right.
Cost conscious always.
Yeah, I'm like, Jeffrey, why are we in Big Bear? He's
Yeah.
like, don't worry about it.
Exactly.
So I think it's interesting that that everybody gets to pick their own style of work. And Lincoln accomplished so much, but he was also interested in so many things. All of the guys that he beat for the presidency were the kind of lawyers that you're talking about, who worked much harder to find clients who were very wealthy, and they did all of the social things to generate more clients. That wasn't Lincoln.
And do you think because of that he was more relatable to the general public who he was representing when he went into politics?
One of the beautiful things about Lincoln, I think, is that no matter how rich he got, no matter how fancy Mary Todd wanted him to be, he never changed his approach to other human beings. And I don't think he ever changed his view of himself. You know, the old line from the Tom Wolfe book, The Right Stuff, boys want to be somebody, men want to do something. Lincoln didn't have to be anybody. He was Lincoln. And he was as comfortable in his skin as anyone has ever been. But he wanted to do things. What's interesting to me is making money just wasn't really one of those things. And I don't think either one of you guys is motivated by the money. Well, you are. But both of you are motivated by the same passions.
Yeah.
And part of those passions is Lincoln, I think, strikes me as Lincoln-esque, because I know from you that, you know, the 24/7 approach you take to representing clients has less to do with the money and more to do with the fact that you feel a personal responsibility for that client.
That's right. I mean, I think when you took the oath to be a lawyer, that matters. I think that when someone entrusts you with whatever matter, big or small, it's a matter that's vital to them. It will affect them. Right. It may be their only opportunity to be part of the legal system. And I think you have to take that seriously. When I sat as a pro tem judge, no matter what the matter was, big or small, I would take it really seriously.
Yeah.
I would not fail to research all angles, because often those folks, I would never see them again. They would never be in a courtroom. And I wanted them to leave and know that the system worked. Even if they lost, the system gave them their fair shot. And that was vital to me. The most important part of it was them leaving and knowing that wherever they came from, they got a fair shot.
Well, there are no small claims
Right.
It's a big deal for the people who are there.
I agree.
And I guess that's Lincoln-esque. You know, there are a lot of lawyer jokes, and I've written a lot of law shows, which inevitably cast lawyers in a negative light sometimes. But
Played by yours truly.
we've never been able to cast you for anything. You usually play the challenged litigant.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
That is a really good one.
The fact is, Lincoln loved being a lawyer, and I love being a lawyer. You strike me as a guy who loves being a lawyer.
I mean, for me, being a lawyer changed everything for me. Like, I don't think if I was a lawyer, I would have had. It allowed me to develop my personality. It allowed me to meet people that I would have no business meeting from where I came from, and allowed me to get in and have experiences that are way beyond the practice of law just because the opportunity was there. I cultivated it, went for it, or developed it out of.
The fact that you came to our country and stole our jobs.
Exactly.
Can we talk about that for a second? It's the northern border that has to be
Exactly.
closed.
Yes.
I've been saying,
Canadian bacon.
I've been saying for years,
Canadian bacon.
we've taken our eye off the ball,
Off our hat.
off our hat.
Yeah, America's hat.
First of all, thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
We have so enjoyed it, and I have to say, we're not paying the hourly rate.
Yeah.
I'd give you a discount rate.
Well, they.
Yeah, and I just can't wait to see where this partnership keeps going. I mean, it's great. We've been friends forever, and then it's just one of my favorite people in the world.
And the wives are okay with it.
The wives love each other more than we love each other.
I know Yogurt Greg.
Yeah, he knows Yogurt Greg when I had a frozen yogurt store back in the day.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was very Lincoln-esque.
Yeah, that's a long time
Ate
ago.
all the profits.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No one
absolutely.
wants to talk about Yogurt Greg.
I still have stories.
Yeah.
There's no podcast.
Other episodes. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you guys.
The How to Be Abe Lincoln podcast is based on the book How to Be Abe Lincoln: 7 Steps to Leading a Legendary Life by Jonathan Shapiro. Out now everywhere. The podcast is produced and hosted by Jonathan Shapiro and Greg Grunberg. Music, editing, and producing by Nick Marzak. This has been another Motel Podcasts production.